Title: The Christmas Clock. A tale of magic, second chances, and the timeless spirit of Christmas. Chapter 1: The Forgotten Bell. The snow fell softly over the small town of Wintergrove, blanketing the streets in quiet serenity. Twinkling lights adorned every window, and the scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air. Yet, despite the festive cheer around her, 12-year-old Clara couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness as she stood on the icy steps of her grandmother's house. This was Clara's first Christmas without her parents, who were away on a work assignment overseas. Though her grandmother, Nana Rose, had done everything to make the holiday special, there was something missing. Clara missed the way her mother baked gingerbread cookies with too much icing or how her father always sang carols slightly off-key. Christmas this year felt incomplete, like a story left unfinished. "Clara, dear, could you bring down the decorations from the attic?" Nana Rose called from the kitchen. Her voice was warm but tinged with a weariness that came with age. "Okay, Nana," Clara replied, pulling herself out of her thoughts. She trudged up the creaky stairs to the attic, flashlight in hand. The attic was a treasure trove of memories, filled with dusty boxes, old furniture, and forgotten trinkets from a time long past. Clara rummaged through a stack of boxes labeled Christmas until her hand brushed against something cold and metallic. She shone the flashlight over it, revealing an ornate clock, its face surrounded by intricate carvings of holly leaves and stars. "Wow!" Clara whispered, brushing off the dust. The clock had long stopped ticking, its hands frozen at 12 o'clock. The brass frame glinted faintly in the dim light, and along the edges, Clara noticed tiny engravings of words she couldn't quite decipher. She carried the clock downstairs, setting it on the dining table. "Nana, look what I found in the attic!" But that night, as Clara lay in bed, her thoughts kept drifting back to the clock and the missing bell. Something about the story tugged at her, a strange feeling she couldn't shake, like the clock was more than just a broken relic. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with swirling snow, shimmering bells, and a faint chime that echoed in the distance. At the stroke of midnight, Clara's eyes snapped open. She sat up, her room bathed in silvery moonlight. She listened closely, her heart pounding in her chest. Ding! The sound of a bell echoed faintly through the house, though it seemed impossible. Clara's eyes darted to her bedroom door, and she felt an irresistible urge to follow the sound. Wrapping herself in her robe, she crept downstairs. The house was eerily quiet, yet the faint chime continued, drawing her to the dining room where the clock rested. The clock's frozen hands now glowed faintly in the darkness, casting strange patterns on the walls. Clara stepped closer, her breath visible in the cold air. She touched the clock gently, and for a moment she thought she saw something move in its reflection, someone standing behind her. "Hello, Clara," a deep, gravelly voice said. She spun around, gasping. Standing before her was an elderly man with kind but piercing eyes, dressed in a long coat dusted with snowflakes. His hands held a small wooden box. Who are you?" Clara stammered, clutching the edge of the table. The man smiled faintly. "I'm a keeper of things lost and found," he said. "And it seems you've found something very important." Clara's heart raced. "The clock?" "Yes," the man replied, his gaze flickering to the ornate timepiece. "And with it, the chance to find something even greater, the Christmas bell." Clara stared at him, her mind spinning. "You mean, the bell isn't gone forever?" "Not if you're willing to help," the man said, his voice low and steady. "But be warned, the journey will not be easy. Time itself will test you." Clara swallowed hard, her fear giving way to curiosity and determination. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. The man smiled, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. "Then let us begin." And with a wave of his hand, the room filled with a soft, golden light. Before Clara could speak, the world around her dissolved into a swirling vortex of snow and stars. Chapter 2: The Midnight Stranger. When the golden light faded, Clara found herself standing in a completely different world. The cozy familiarity of her grandmother's dining room was gone, replaced by an open expanse of snow-covered fields. The air was crisp and cold, the sky above alive with stars that seemed brighter and closer than she had ever seen. "What just happened?" Clara whispered, looking around in awe. The elderly man stood beside her, his coat fluttering in the gentle breeze. He leaned on a gnarled walking stick, his weathered face illuminated by the moonlight. Despite the chill, he seemed perfectly at ease. "You've crossed the boundary of time," he said simply, gesturing to the vast landscape. "We're no longer in the present. This is Wintergrove, but as it was many years ago." Clara blinked, trying to process his words. The town in the distance looked similar, but everything was brighter, livelier, as if it had been painted anew. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the sound of laughter and sleigh bells echoed faintly in the distance. "You mean this is the past?" she asked, her breath forming little clouds in the cold air. The man nodded. "The year is 1947, to be exact. This is the Christmas Eve when the bell was lost." Clara felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the gravity of what he was saying. "So, the bell is here? Somewhere in this town?" "Yes, but finding it won't be simple," the man said. "The bell's disappearance wasn't a random accident. Its magic is tied to the hopes and hearts of the people who lived here. If you want to recover it, you'll need to understand what was lost that night." Clara frowned. "Why me? Why can't you just get it yourself?" The man chuckled, his breath visible in the frosty air. "Because the bell doesn't respond to those of us who guard its history. It chooses someone with the heart to restore its magic. And Clara, it's chosen you." Clara felt a mix of pride and trepidation at his words. "So, where do I start?" The man pointed toward the twinkling lights of the town. "Begin where the heart of Christmas beats strongest, in the square. Follow the people. Listen to their stories. And most importantly, don't lose sight of why you're here." Before she could ask him more, the man tipped his hat and began to walk away, his figure blending into the shadows of the snow-laden trees. "Wait!" Clara called after him. "What's your name?" He turned back briefly, his eyes glinting. "You can call me Mr. Farrow," he said with a small smile. "We'll meet again soon." And with that, he vanished into the night, leaving Clara alone in the snowy field. Clara's steps crunched softly in the snow as she made her way toward the town. The closer she got, the more vivid the sights and sounds became. The square was bustling with activity, children ran around in scarves and mittens, merchants sold roasted chestnuts from carts, and carolers sang joyfully near a giant, glittering tree at the center of the square. At the heart of it all was the Christmas bell. Suspended high above the square in a beautifully wrought iron archway, it gleamed like silver in the moonlight. Clara stopped in her tracks, her breath catching. "It's beautiful," she whispered, staring up at it. The bell wasn't large, but it had an undeniable presence. Its surface was etched with intricate designs, stars, holly, and words in a language she couldn't understand. Just looking at it filled her with warmth, as though the very essence of Christmas was radiating from it. "Do you like it?" a voice said behind her. Clara turned to see a girl about her age, wearing a thick coat and a bright red scarf. Her cheeks were rosy, and her smile was friendly. "It's amazing," Clara replied. "I've never seen anything like it." The girl beamed. "That's the Christmas bell. They say it brings good luck and keeps the spirit of Christmas alive in Wintergrove." Clara hesitated, suddenly realizing she didn't know how to explain her presence here. "I'm visiting," she said carefully. "Well, welcome to Wintergrove," the girl said cheerfully. "I'm Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie." "Clara," she replied, shaking the girl's outstretched hand. "You came on the perfect night," Maggie said. "The bell will ring at midnight, and everyone will make a wish. It's my favorite part of Christmas." Clara smiled faintly, her mind spinning. Midnight was only a few hours away. Somehow, the bell would disappear by then, and she had no idea how or why. "Hey, you should meet my friends," Maggie said, tugging Clara's sleeve. "We're building snow forts near the bakery." Clara hesitated, glancing back at the bell. "Actually, I think I'll stay here for a while." Maggie gave her a curious look but shrugged. Suit yourself? Maybe I'll see you later. As Maggie ran off, Clara's eyes stayed fixed on the bell. She had to figure out what would happen and how to stop it. But as the minutes ticked by, Clara began to notice something strange. Though the square was lively, there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. Adults spoke in hushed tones, their faces serious, and some cast worried glances toward the darkening sky. Clara caught snippets of their conversations. Storm's coming, and it'll be a bad one. Should we cancel the festivities? No one will want to stay out in this weather. The mayor insists we keep going. Says the bell has to ring, storm or not. Clara's heart sank. The storm Mr. Farrow had mentioned was already on its way. She needed to act quickly. Chapter 3: The Gathering Storm. The festive cheer in the square was beginning to dim as the first gusts of icy winds swept through Wintergrove. The carolers sang on, but their voices wavered under the weight of the growing storm. Overhead, the stars dimmed as clouds rolled in, cloaking the town in a grayish hue. Clara stayed near the base of the bell's archway, her gaze flickering between the glowing timepiece in her pocket. Mr. Farrow had slipped it there without her noticing, and the bell that hung above the square. Her heart raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening. If the bell disappears during this storm, she whispered to herself, then it has to happen soon. But how? And who, or what, was responsible? Clara scanned the crowd, looking for any sign of suspicious activity. Her eyes landed on Maggie, who had rejoined her friends near the bakery. The group was throwing snowballs and laughing, completely unaware of the tension rising among the adults. Clara felt a pang of envy. She wanted to join them, to forget the strange responsibility that had been thrust upon her. But she couldn't. Suddenly a hand landed on her shoulder. She flinched and turned to see a kind-faced woman with a woolen shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Are you lost, dear? The woman asked, her voice gentle. Clara hesitated. No, I'm just waiting for the bell to ring. The woman's expression softened. Ah, the Christmas bell. It's been a tradition here for as long as I can remember. My father used to say it carried the wishes of every person in town straight to the stars. Clara tilted her head. Do you believe that? The woman's eyes sparkled with nostalgia. I did once. But times are harder now. People don't wish as boldly as they used to. Perhaps that's why the storm seems stronger. Before Clara could ask what she meant, the woman smiled and moved off into the crowd, leaving her with more questions than answers. As the hour crept closer to midnight, the square grew quieter. Families began to drift toward their homes, murmuring anxiously about the storm. The once cheerful air now felt heavy, and Clara could feel it pressing on her chest. Just then, Maggie appeared beside her again, her scarf whipping in the wind. Hey, are you okay? Clara nodded distractedly. Maggie, has anything strange ever happened with the bell before? Like, has it ever disappeared? Maggie's eyes widened. Disappear? No way. It's been here forever. But, she hesitated, glancing around. There are stories. My dad says the bell is magic, that it protects the town somehow. He says if we ever lose it, Wintergrove might never be the same. Clara's stomach turned. That was exactly what Mr. Farrow had said. Why? Maggie pressed. Did someone say it's going to disappear? Clara shook her head quickly. No, I just heard some grown-ups talking about how important it is. Well, duh, Maggie said, rolling her eyes. It's the heart of Christmas. Besides, nothing bad will happen tonight. The mayor wouldn't let it. The mayor? Clara asked. Maggie pointed to a tall man standing near the tree. He wore a long coat and a top hat, his stern face lit by the flickering glow of lanterns. He always makes sure the bell rings at midnight, Maggie said. He says it's the town's duty to honor the tradition, no matter what. Clara studied the man, noting the tightness in his jaw and the way he glanced at the sky with unease. He doesn't look so sure, she muttered. Maggie shrugged. He's just worried about the storm. My dad says it'll be the worst one we've had in years. As the final hour approached, Clara's anxiety grew. The wind howled through the square, tugging at the decorations and rattling the bell's archway. Snow began to fall more heavily, swirling in frantic spirals. And then she saw it, movement near the bell. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but as she squinted through the flurries, she spotted a figure climbing the archway. The person was dressed in dark clothing, their face obscured by a scarf and hood. "Maggie!" Clara hissed. "Someone's trying to take the bell!" Maggie gasped, her eyes darting toward the archway. "What? Are you sure?" Clara nodded, her heart pounding. "We have to stop them." Before Maggie could respond, Clara took off toward the bell, weaving through the thinning crowd. The figure was now halfway up the archway, their movements quick and purposeful. "Hey!" Clara shouted, her voice barely carrying over the wind. The figure froze for a moment, glancing down. Then, as if deciding they didn't have time to deal with her, they continued climbing. Clara reached the base of the archway and looked up. "Come down!" she yelled. "You can't take the bell!" The figure didn't respond. Instead, they reached for the bell, their gloved hand brushing its surface. "No!" Clara cried. Without thinking, she began to climb after them. The icy metal was slippery, and her fingers ached in the cold, but she forced herself upward, determined to stop them. By the time she was halfway up, the figure had managed to unhook the bell. They held it in one hand, its surface glowing faintly in the storm's eerie light. "Stop!" Clara shouted again. The figure turned to her, their eyes meeting hers briefly through the storm. And then, to Clara's shock, they leapt from the archway, disappearing into the swirling snow with the bell in their grasp. "No!" Clara screamed, scrambling to the top. She searched the ground below, but the figure was gone, leaving only faint footprints quickly vanishing under the snow. Her chest heaved as the weight of what had happened sank in. The bell was gone, and she had no idea how to get it back. Chapter 4: The Vanishing Footprints. Clara climbed down from the archway as fast as she could, her hands trembling and her breaths coming in short, sharp bursts. The icy metal burned against her fingers, but she didn't care. The bell was gone, and the town square seemed emptier without its gleaming presence. Maggie was waiting for her at the base, her face pale. "What happened? Who was that?" "I don't know," Clara admitted, her voice shaky. "They took the bell and just disappeared." Maggie looked around, her eyes wide. "We have to tell someone. The mayor, the police, my dad, anyone." Clara hesitated. Would they believe two kids? More importantly, would they understand what was really at stake? She thought of Mr. Farrow's warning. The bell's magic is tied to the hopes and hearts of the people who lived here. "We can't," Clara said, grabbing Maggie's arm. "They'll think we're making it up. We have to figure this out ourselves." Maggie looked skeptical but nodded reluctantly. "Okay, but where do we start? That person could be anywhere by now." Clara knelt in the snow, studying the faint footprints left by the thief. The wind was already beginning to cover them, but they led away from the square, toward the edge of town. "There," Clara said, pointing. "We follow the tracks." Maggie gulped but nodded. "Okay. But if we don't come back soon, I'm telling my dad." The two girls hurried through the streets of Wintergrove, the storm growing fiercer with each passing minute. The footprints were faint and erratic, as though the thief had stumbled in their haste. The town grew quieter as they moved farther from the square. The warm glow of lanterns gave way to shadowed alleyways and frost-covered buildings. Finally, the tracks led them to a narrow path that wound through the trees at the edge of town. Clara stopped, peering into the dark woods. The snow seemed to fall heavier here, muffling all sound. "Do you think they went in there?" Maggie asked, shivering. Clara nodded. "It's the only way the tracks go." Maggie hesitated. "What if it's a trap? What if they're dangerous?" Clara swallowed hard. She didn't have answers to Maggie's questions, but she knew they couldn't stop now. "We'll be careful," she said. "But we have to keep going. The bell is too important." Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the path, Maggie close behind her. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sounds their crunching footsteps and the occasional creak of tree branches in the wind. The footprints continued deeper into the woods, winding between snow-covered trees that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows danced at the edges of her vision, and the air felt heavy with something she couldn't quite name. "Clara," Maggie whispered, her voice trembling. "Do you hear that?" Clara stopped, straining to listen. At first, she heard nothing but the wind. Then, faintly, she caught the sound of something metallic, a soft, rhythmic chime. "It's the bell," Clara said, her heart leaping. "It has to be." They quickened their pace, following the sound. It grew louder, guiding them through the trees like a beacon. Finally, they emerged into a small clearing. At the center of the clearing stood a lone figure, the same cloak thief who had taken the bell. They were hunched over a wooden chest, the bell resting on the ground beside them. The faint glow of the bell illuminated their face for the first time. Clara gasped. The thief wasn't much older than her, a boy, perhaps 15 or 16, with piercing blue eyes and a face etched with worry. "Hey!" Clara shouted, stepping forward. "Stop! That bell doesn't belong to you!" The boy whipped around, his expression one of panic. He grabbed the bell and clutched it tightly to his chest. "Stay back!" he warned, his voice shaking. "I didn't steal it, I had to take it." "What are you talking about?" Clara demanded, moving closer. Maggie stayed behind her, clinging to her arm. The boy's eyes darted between them, as if weighing whether to trust them. Finally, he said, "The storm, it's not just a storm. It's something worse. The bell's magic is the only thing that can stop it, but the mayor doesn't understand. He thinks ringing it will protect the town, but he's wrong. If it rings this year, it'll shatter." Clara frowned, trying to make sense of his words. "What do you mean? How do you know that?" "I just do," the boy said, his voice desperate. "Please, you have to believe me. I'm trying to save Wintergrove." Maggie tugged on Clara's sleeve. "Clara, what if he's telling the truth? What if the bell really is in danger?" Clara hesitated. The boy's fear seemed genuine, but Mr. Farrow had said the bell needed to ring to restore its magic. Who was right? Before Clara could decide, the wind picked up, howling through the trees with a force that nearly knocked them off their feet. Snow swirled around them, and the ground trembled as a low, rumbling sound filled the air. The boy's eyes widened in terror. "It's coming," he whispered. "We're out of time." Clara looked at him, then at the glowing bell in his hands. The storm wasn't just weather, it was something far more dangerous. And if they didn't act fast, the entire town might be at risk. Chapter 5: A Choice of Courage. The rumbling in the ground intensified, accompanied by a deep, guttural sound that seemed to echo from the very heart of the storm. The wind whipped around the clearing, snow stinging their faces and obscuring their vision. The boy held the bell tighter, his knuckles white against the gleaming metal. "It's here," the boy said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "If we don't stop it, the whole town will be swallowed." "What's here?" Clara demanded, her fear giving way to frustration. "What are you talking about?" "The storm bearer," the boy said, his voice trembling. "It's an old legend, something the elders don't talk about anymore. They think it's just a story. But it's real. It feeds on despair, on broken hopes. That's why the bell's magic matters, it keeps the storm bearer away." Clara blinked, struggling to process his words. "But you said the bell can't ring this year. If it's supposed to protect the town, why not?" The boy shook his head. "It's been weakening for years, and no one noticed. If it rings now, it won't hold together. It'll break, and its magic will scatter." "How do you know all this?" Maggie asked, stepping forward despite her trembling hands. The boy hesitated, then looked at Clara. "Because it happened once before. My family was there, they saw it. Another town, far from here. They didn't listen, and they lost everything." Clara's mind raced. Could he be telling the truth? She thought of Mr. Farrow's words, the strange glow of the bell, the way the storm had grown fiercer as midnight approached. The ground trembled again, this time harder, and a deep, roaring sound tore through the forest. The snow swirled violently, and a dark shape began to emerge from the storm, a towering form, its outlines shifting like smoke. "It's the storm-bearer!" the boy shouted, backing away. "We have to stop it!" Clara's breath caught as the monstrous figure loomed over the clearing. It wasn't solid, but a swirling mass of shadows and ice, with glowing eyes that burned like cold fire. The air around it crackled with an unnatural chill, and every instinct in Clara's body screamed for her to run. But she couldn't. The bell, glowing faintly in the boy's hands, seemed to pulse with urgency, as though it was trying to speak. Clara stared at it, her mind racing. "What do we do?" Maggie asked, her voice high-pitched with fear. Clara stepped forward, her gaze locked on the boy. "You said the bell can't ring this year. But if it's the only thing that can stop that thing, what choice do we have?" The boy shook his head. "If it shatters, Wintergrove will lose its magic forever. The storm will stop, but the town will never recover. There has to be another way." "What way?" Clara pressed. "We don't have time." The storm-bearer roared again, its icy tendrils reaching toward the clearing. Snow whipped around them in a frenzy, and the ground beneath their feet began to crack. Clara looked at the bell, then at the boy. "You're scared it'll break. But what if it doesn't? What if it's stronger than you think?" The boy hesitated, his grip on the bell tightening. "Please," Clara said, stepping closer. "If we don't try, the town won't survive. I believe in the bell's magic, and in the hope it carries." For a moment, the boy said nothing. Then, slowly, he held the bell out to Clara. "You're braver than I am," he said softly. "If anyone should ring it, it's you." Clara took the bell, its surface warm despite the icy air. It felt alive in her hands, humming with a faint, steady rhythm. She turned toward the storm-bearer, which was now almost upon them, its massive form blotting out the sky. "Clara, be careful!" Maggie shouted. Clara nodded, her hands shaking. She raised the bell high, feeling its weight in her arms. Taking a deep breath, she swung it with all her might. The sound that followed was unlike anything she had ever heard. It wasn't just a chime, it was a song, a cascade of notes that seemed to fill the air and push back the storm. The bell glowed brighter, its light piercing through the darkness. The storm-bearer roared, its form beginning to unravel as the sound washed over it. The shadows dissolved, the icy tendrils shattered, and the storm itself began to weaken. But the bell didn't stop. The glow intensified, its warmth spreading through the clearing like a sunrise. Clara felt tears streaming down her face, not from fear, but from the overwhelming beauty of the sound. The storm-bearer gave one final, echoing cry before it disappeared, its presence vanishing into the night. The snow stopped falling, the wind calmed, and the forest was still once more. Clara lowered the bell, her arms aching. She looked at it, expecting to see cracks or damage, but it was whole. Its glow faded, leaving behind only its usual golden sheen. "It didn't break," she whispered, relief flooding her. The boy stared at the bell, then at Clara. I was wrong. You were right. The bell's magic is stronger than I thought." Maggie rushed forward, throwing her arms around Clara. "You did it! You saved Wintergrove!" Clara smiled weakly, her legs threatening to give out beneath her. "We all did." As they made their way back to town, carrying the bell between them, the first rays of dawn began to break through the clouds. The storm had passed, and the town square was peaceful once more. Clara placed the bell back in its rightful spot beneath the archway. When it rang again next Christmas, it would carry a new kind of magic, one forged by courage, hope, and the belief that even the darkest storms could be overcome. Chapter 6: The Dawn of Hope. The golden archway glinted in the morning light as Clara, Maggie, and the boy placed the bell back on its stand. The snow around the square shimmered like diamonds, and the stillness felt like a promise of peace to come. Exhausted but triumphant, Clara stepped back to admire the bell. It looked as though nothing had happened, no cracks, no signs of wear. It sat gleaming, as proud and strong as it had ever been. The boy wiped his brow and sighed. I can't believe it worked. Clara turned to him. I'm Clara, by the way. And this is Maggie. I'm Finn, he replied, offering a sheepish smile. Maggie crossed her arms. Finn, you've got a lot of explaining to do. Why didn't you just tell someone what you knew instead of stealing the bell? Finn hesitated, his expression clouding. I tried once. But no one believed me. My family lived through the last time the Stormbearer came, but everyone thought it was just a freak storm. When I realized it was happening again, I didn't know who to trust. Well, Clara said, her voice softening. You can trust us now. Next time, maybe we'll figure it out together before things get that bad. Finn nodded, looking genuinely grateful. As the trio stood in the quiet square, a familiar voice broke the silence. What are you doing out here so early? They turned to see Mr. Farrow, his coat bundled tightly against the cold. His sharp eyes immediately fell on the bell, and he paused mid-step, his face a mix of surprise and awe. It rang, didn't it? He asked, his voice quiet. Clara nodded. It did. The storm was something bigger, something dangerous. But the bell stopped it. Mr. Farrow's gaze lingered on the bell, and a small smile tugged at his lips. So, it's magic held after all. I knew it had a few more miracles left in it. He turned back to Clara, Maggie, and Finn. You three have done something incredible. The town might never know what you saved them from, but I do. Thank you. Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest, not from the bell, but from the weight of Mr. Farrow's gratitude. She glanced at Finn and Maggie, who both wore matching smiles. By the time the rest of Wintergrove awoke, the storm's damage had already begun to fade. The streets were clear, the air was crisp, and a strange calm settled over the town. The mayor declared the day a town-wide celebration, calling it the miracle of Wintergrove. While no one outside the trio and Mr. Farrow knew the full story, it didn't matter. The people's spirits were lifted, their laughter echoing through the square as they danced and sang. The bell rang once more that evening, not out of necessity, but in celebration. Its chime resonated through the town, filling every heart with a sense of wonder and renewal. As the sun set, Clara, Maggie, and Finn stood at the edge of the square, watching the festivities. You know, Maggie said, we could use someone like you around here, Finn. Especially if something like this happens again. Finn smiled, a rare hint of mischief in his eyes. I might just take you up on that. Wintergrove isn't so bad after all. Clara looked at her friends, feeling a sense of belonging she hadn't realized she was missing. The storm had tested them, but it had also brought them closer. Whatever happens, she said, we'll face it together. And as the bell's final chime echoed into the starry night, Clara knew that Wintergrove's magic, its hope, was safe for another year. Chapter 7: A New Tradition. The snow had settled into a soft blanket over Wintergrove, glittering under the clear night sky. The town square, bustling with life just hours before, now lay quiet and peaceful. Clara, Maggie, and Finn lingered near the archway, the golden bell gleaming behind them. It's strange, Finn said, breaking the silence. For years I thought the bell was just an object, something people worshipped without understanding its power. But after tonight, I realize it's not just the bell. It's the people, the hope they carry, that gives it strength. Clara smiled. Maybe it's a little bit of both. Maggie hugged herself against the cold. So, what happens now? Do we just pretend like none of this happened? I mean, we did save the town. Clara laughed. I think we can leave out the part about the Stormbearer. The mayor would probably just think we're crazy. Finn grinned. But we'll know the truth. And maybe someday, if the town needs us again, we'll be ready. As the days passed, life in Wintergrove returned to normal. The storm became little more than a memory, and the townsfolk celebrated their miracle with stories and songs. But for Clara, Maggie, and Finn, the events of that night stayed close to their hearts. They began meeting in secret, sneaking off to the woods or the old clock tower to share stories, plan adventures, and talk about the magic of Wintergrove. Finn stayed true to his word, settling into the town like he'd always belong. The three of them became inseparable, bound by the unspoken promise to protect the magic they'd come to understand. As the next Christmas approached, the trio decided to start a new tradition. On the eve of the holiday, they gathered in the town square with lanterns and ribbons, decorating the archway and the area around the bell. Word spread quickly, and soon, the entire town joined in. Families brought handmade ornaments, children strung garlands, and the square transformed into a dazzling display of light and color. The bell stood at the center of it all, shining brighter than ever. When the final ribbon was tied and the last lantern lit, Clara stepped forward and rang the bell. Its chime filled the square, warm and melodic, wrapping everyone in a blanket of joy and peace. "Do you think it's stronger now?" Maggie asked later that night, as the three of them stood together, admiring their work. Clara nodded. "I think so. The bell's magic comes from all of us, from the love and hope we share. As long as we keep believing, it'll never fail." Finn looked at the bell, a rare smile crossing his face. "Then I guess we've got a lot of work to do. Keeping a town like this hopeful isn't easy." Clara grinned. "Good thing we're not doing it alone." The three of them stood in silence for a moment, the cold air nipping at their faces. Above them, the stars twinkled like tiny bells, their light stretching across the heavens. And as the clock struck midnight, the bell chimed once more, its sound carrying across Wintergrove, a reminder of the magic that bound them all. Chapter 8: The Legacy of the Bell. The winter days slowly melted into the promise of spring, but the memory of that fateful Christmas Eve lingered in the hearts of Wintergrove's townsfolk. The decorations stayed up well past the holiday season, and the archway with its golden bell became more than just a symbol of Christmas. It became a beacon of hope, resilience, and unity. For Clara, Maggie, and Finn, life had changed. They were no longer just three kids caught up in a winter storm. They had become keepers of the town's most precious secret. The bell's magic was not just its chime, but the strength and hope of Wintergrove itself. One quiet afternoon, weeks after the celebration, Clara wandered back to the square. Snow still blanketed the ground, and the bell gleamed under the weak winter sun. She reached out and ran her fingers along its smooth surface, feeling a faint hum of energy beneath her touch. "Thinking about ringing it again?" Maggie's voice came from behind her, teasing but warm. Clara turned, smiling as Maggie and Finn approached, their cheeks red from the cold. "Not yet," Clara said. "But it's strange, isn't it? Knowing what we know now. Every year, people ring this bell without realizing how powerful it is." "Maybe it's better that way," Finn said, shrugging. "If everyone knew, they'd probably mess it up. Magic like this doesn't work when people are careless." Maggie nodded thoughtfully. "But we're not going to be careless. We're going to protect it. Right?" Clara looked at her friends, her chest swelling with pride. "Right." The trio began meeting every week, not out of obligation, but because they knew the bell, and the town, needed guardians. They spent hours poring over old stories, sneaking into the library's archives to uncover Wintergrove's forgotten history. What they found surprised them. The bell's magic wasn't just to ward off the stormbearer. It had been a source of protection and renewal for centuries, its chime woven into the town's very existence. But the bell's magic was not limitless. Finn pointed out a passage in one of the dusty books. "The bell thrives on unity, but it falters with despair. Should the town lose its hope, the bell will fade, and with it, the magic of Wintergrove. That's why the stormbearer came," Finn said, his voice quiet. "It wasn't just the weather. The town was losing its hope. The magic was weak." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Then we have to make sure that never happens again." Months passed, and the trio's efforts to preserve the town's magic began to take shape. They organized small gatherings, encouraging the townsfolk to share stories of kindness and hope. They helped rebuild parts of the town that had been damaged by the storm, their enthusiasm infectious. Finn, who had once been an outsider, became an integral part of Wintergrove's community. His sharp wit and quiet determination won over even the most skeptical neighbors. Maggie, ever the dreamer, started writing down their adventures, creating a book she called The Chronicles of the Golden Bell. "Someday," she said with a grin, "people will read this and remember how we saved the town." Clara, the steadfast leader, kept her focus on the bell itself. She checked on it regularly, feeling its hum of magic and marveling at its resilience. As the next Christmas approached, the trio prepared for another celebration. This time, the entire town came together in ways they never had before. The decorations were more elaborate, the songs more joyous, and the laughter louder. When the clock struck midnight, Clara, Maggie, and Finn stood beneath the archway, their hands joined. "Ready?" Clara asked, looking at her friends. Finn nodded. "Always." Maggie grinned. "Let's make it count." Together they pulled the bell's rope, sending its chime echoing into the night. The sound was pure and radiant, filling every corner of Wintergrove with warmth. And for the first time in years, the bell's glow seemed brighter, its magic stronger than ever. As the town celebrated, Clara looked at her friends and smiled. They had faced the storm and emerged stronger. The bell's magic would endure, not because of its chime, but because of the hope and unity they had nurtured in Wintergrove. And as the stars twinkled overhead, Clara knew one thing for certain: the Golden Bell's legacy would live on, not just in the stories they told, but in the hearts of everyone who believed in its magic. Epilogue: The Bell That Kept Ringing. Years passed, and the town of Wintergrove grew, but its charm and spirit remained the same. The Golden Bell in the town square became more than just an ornament, it became a symbol of everything Wintergrove stood for: hope, unity, and the quiet magic of believing in something greater than oneself. Clara, Maggie, and Finn never forgot the night they saved the town, nor did they let the townsfolk forget the power of coming together. The three of them became known as the Bell Guardians, not in an official sense, but as the ones who kept Wintergrove's heart beating strong. Clara grew into a natural leader, her quiet strength inspiring others to take pride in their community. Maggie pursued her dreams of storytelling, publishing the Chronicles of the Golden Bell, a fictionalized but heartfelt account of their adventures. It became a beloved classic in Wintergrove and beyond. And Finn? He stayed in Wintergrove, building a life he never thought he could have. The boy who once felt like an outsider now had a home, friends, and a purpose. Every Christmas Eve, the trio would return to the square, no matter where life had taken them. They'd stand together beneath the archway, ringing the bell and watching the town celebrate. As the years went by, the tradition grew. Families would gather, sharing their hopes for the year ahead and their gratitude for the year behind. Children would place ribbons and ornaments on the archway, whispering their wishes to the bell. And every year, as the clock struck midnight, the bell's chime would echo across the snowy hills, its magic a reminder that Wintergrove's strength lay in its people. The Golden Bell became a legend. Some said its glow came from the stars themselves, a gift to the town for their unwavering spirit. Others whispered that the bell was alive, its magic growing stronger with every kind deed and every act of love. But Clara, Maggie, and Finn knew the truth. The bell's power came from belief, from the simple, extraordinary magic of people coming together and sharing hope. One Christmas Eve, decades after that fateful storm, Clara stood under the archway with her two oldest friends. The crowd had gathered as always, their faces lit with joy and anticipation. "You think they'll ever know the full story?" Maggie asked, a twinkle in her eye. "Maybe one day," Clara said with a smile. "But for now, the magic speaks for itself." Finn gave the bell rope a tug, and the familiar chime rang out, filling the square and the surrounding hills with its warm, golden tone. The crowd cheered, and the sound of their laughter mixed with the echo of the bell. As the night grew quiet, Clara looked up at the stars. They twinkled back, as if acknowledging the gift that had been passed down through generations. To everyone watching, thank you for coming along on this journey. The story of the Golden Bell reminds us that the greatest magic lies in our connection to one another and the hope we share. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss more magical tales like this one. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below. What would your Christmas wish be if you rang the Golden Bell? And don't forget to turn on notifications to join us for more adventures filled with heart, magic, and holiday cheer. Until next time, keep believing in the magic of hope and kindness. Happy holidays, and we'll see you soon!